Hello, welcome to the ninth ACM general meeting of the semester. It's happened on the 10th week. Don't worry about it. Um, Next slide. We'll have a short announcements of the ACM things that we're doing and events and another thing, and then Vern will speak to us today. That will be happening shortly. First things first. We're trying to sell this stuff before the semester ends, so we're still selling World's Finest Chocolate. Josh can hold up the box for you. That's a box. It's completely not angled towards them though. That's better. And we also have a small stockpile of shirts that we have ordered and are available for members to purchase for $10. They look like I don't have my shirt on me. Does anybody? No, forgot to bring that out. They look like something that I can show people after the meeting if they're interested. Next slide. So, Taubetta Pie is hosting a salary negotiation workshop tomorrow. For anybody who doesn't know who Tau Beta Pi is, they're like a professional fraternity sorority thing that you get into if you have really high grades, basically, like 4.0 or something. I don't know. But they're hosting a salary negotiation workshop tomorrow. They're at 2 Sequoia 142. Next slide. Debugging competition. That is happening next Friday. Actually happening. We made sure. From 6 to 9. It's not going to take the full 3 hours. It's going to take substantially less than that. But that's the period that we have slotted for it in case something goes drastically wrong. It's happening downstairs, almost directly below us, actually, in Riverside 1013. And there will be pizza. Almost definitely will be pizza. As long as we remember to order the pizza. Next slide. Two other events. These are happening the Friday after Kryptonite and the Friday after Kryptonite. So, sorry, the Friday after the debugging competition, the Friday after the debugging competition. For people who don't know, Kryptonite is basically a night where we have speakers from academic and professional backgrounds come talk about cryptography and security related things, not cryptography related things, security related topics for people to get acquainted with, sort of the concept of computer security and things like that. We don't know where that's happening yet. We'll be figuring that out, but that's in 2 weeks, April 21st. That's a Friday. Definitely Friday. God damn it. I should really proofread these slides. And then ICPC, also a Friday, on April 28th, is a competition where people solve programming problems, and it's fun. And this is the off semester, so it's not the one where you go to regionals if you do top 5, but it's still it runs exactly like the regular competition, so you can consider the like a practice competition, and it's still worth going to because it's a lot of stuff. Yeah, sure. Next slide. NSA questions. So we're still taking questions from the NSA. This is probably the last time we'll be asking, because we have to submit them pretty soon. We actually remembered to put an email on this time. So if anybody wants to has a question that they want, Tom, what's his last name? Tom Wyclock. He's the NSA contact for Sac State, liaison for Sac State, I think. Liaison. And he will be answering questions and sort of related things for us on April 20th, I believe. April 27th. On April 27th, and we need to get the questions to him ahead of time because, security reasons, he has to actually figure out his answers before the day of the thing. So if anybody has questions that they want to ask a highly rated person of the NSA and related things, email them to that email or talk to one of the officers and we can write it down. But we need those soon so we can send them to him. Next slide. Oh yeah, now it's time for Vern. This is a very low resolution picture of Vern playing bongos. Those aren't bongos, those are something else.
Okay, hey everyone. I'm Varun. And today's talk is going to be on making the most of your internship or new job. So, how many of you like have an internship that you're going to start this summer or a new job? Okay, so a few people. So even if you don't have one, hopefully, some of the things that I cover here will be useful for when you do in the future. Um, so, so a bit about my background. I've had four like technology or coding internships at different level of companies. So one was like a startup with just like five people in it, and we actually worked on someone's couch. Another one was a slightly larger web consulting company, and they had around 20 people. And then we had a venture capital. I worked at a venture capital backed startup in Palo Alto that was a bit larger with 40 people. And last summer and currently, I work at like a large publicly traded tech company with around 3,000 people. So these are all like I've done very different things at each of these internships, and they're all very different companies. Yet I would say that my experiences have been very similar. Next slide. So there's what? Is it not on? It's on. Definitely on, dude. All right. Oh, yeah, this is weird. Okay. All right. So what should I learn before I start? So one of the things I'd mention is kind of learn about, at least to learn like the language that you'll be using. And if you've never used it before, like learn the basics of the language. So it doesn't mean you should like become an expert in it, right? But at least understanding the syntax and what you're going to be working in, it'll be advantages so that you can be closer to hitting the ground running on like the first day. Um, and then architecture and design patterns. So for those of you who haven't taken CSE 133 yet, you'll learn a lot of this stuff in that class. But I think even 133 doesn't teach you quite everything that you'll need to know in terms of architecture and design patterns. So if you were like someone were to talk about like service-oriented architectures or model view controllers, and you don't really know what either of those things mean, it might be good to kind of brush up on the basics of those topics. But also to directly ask your manager that you'll be working with this summer about what kind of design patterns or architecture that the company and the project uses specifically. So if you have a bit of an idea of what these are, you'll find that you'll be able to quickly pick up a new code base without having to do as much learning as to like, oh, what does this controller folder do? Why is there something in this model and controller directory? Um, so that's a really easy way that you can just hit the ground running faster, and it's also pretty useful knowledge to have. Next is like I'd say like project management tools to use. So if you've never been in like a Scrum or Agile kind of team, you should probably be familiar just basically with like what a stand up is, what it means what like the concepts of sprint planning, and all of these things are. They're really simple. They're not complex at all. They're just a fancy word for meetings. But if you learn exactly like how these work, you'll be a bit more prepared when the team starts to assign you work and the way that you can talk to your team about how much work you can handle. Um, and I think almost all these tools I mentioned you should be able to find just by googling around. So they're not like none of these things are super complex or difficult. Like you'll need to buy textbooks for. And obviously, lastly, is developer tools. So be familiar with Git or the version control system that you'll be using. I think for most people nowadays, almost everyone uses Git. So again, you should know obviously push, pull, and those commands, but also learn about branching and creating pull requests. So what pull requests are is that say you have some code you want to add to the main code base. You have to create a pull request, and then usually what works is that people on your team will look at the differences between what you're adding and what's already in the code base, and then they'll either approve or deny it. But just knowing how to use these commands in the command line is very useful because a lot of times even though I was familiar with Git, I'd never worked with like Git at like a large scale, so I'd have a bunch of small Git issues and have to rewrite some things because I accidentally deleted stuff, um, and even now like Git gets me every now and then. But and also another thing you might want to pick up is some companies use a specific IDE, so that's like something like Eclipse or IntelliJ or PHP Storm. So basically learning like what happens if I like command click, how can I like use the debugger, how can I step through functions, how can I set up like a remote host for a server, and understanding how to do all these things inside the IDE that you'll be using will make it even easier when you start working because the code base that you're going to be working with at work is probably going to be way different than what you do for most of your assignments. So next slide. So understanding like the expectations of you and like what should you expect to do as an intern or as a new graduate. So the key things that people that you should talk to about this before your internship starts is your manager and generally the person who runs the internship program. So they'll usually tell you like what's made a good intern in the past, like what do we expect out of our interns, like what kind of what kind of technical contribution should they make, but also how should they be able to interact with the team, like how will you be judged and evaluated, and who's going to give you feedback. Um, and so understand that like as an intern, the code you write won't always be good. It'll probably usually be rejected, and people will say like, "Oh, your variable names are wrong," like, "Oh, you're doing this in an incorrect way," like this is inefficient. And know that it's a learning process, right? So they don't expect you to come in as an expert, but they do expect you to come in with an open mind and ready to learn and take in people's feedback and applying it quickly. And again, like be ready to work as a team member. So rarely like will you be doing solo projects on your own. You'll almost always be working with someone else, even if it's just a small individual project, or even if it's like a side project that you're not contributing to directly. You'll still get help from others, or maybe even other interns. And then so the next thing is like learning on the job. Um, at some companies you may have a bit of training, or you might not even have training. I think for us, or at least for my internship, they pretty much my manager gave me a walkthrough of our code base the first day, and that was about it. But I know at Google they send you on the first week all the interns they do like a training program like code style about a bit about the how the Google code base works and stuff. But usually these only last a week. So especially for internships, for new graduates it might be a bit of a longer process. But if you're only working for 12 weeks, they're not going to take more than 1 week just to get you up to speed. And that means that like if there's not that much formal training, that means that a lot of the learning will have to be on your own. Um, and yeah, it'll get very confusing, right? So if it's your first internship, it's likely you've never dealt with code that's this so large before, and it's easy to get intimidated by it. Um, but one way to get around this is read a lot of the documentation. So your company might have an internal wiki or like some kind of documenting source that they use. So reading up on that is a very good way just to get accumulated. Like if there's like one repository you don't really understand, maybe read through that and you can understand exactly what it's there, and what it's used for. And also ask other developers on your team about give me an example of like the best written code base that we have, right? And then maybe understand like how their code style works, like how do they use things, how do they use object-oriented principles, or how do they name their variables, and kind of try to apply what they do to your own work. And then the next thing is like what I call the hierarchy of help. So this is what I found. This is the most effective way that when you're stuck on a problem, like how do I get help for it, right? So the first thing you want to do is obviously try solving the problem, right? And don't just try solving it once, solving it like a couple different ways or a couple different times, and kind of speak through, kind of talk to someone or just talk to like rubber duck programming, right? Just like talk to anything about like what you're going through and speak it out loud. And if you're still stuck, try to check an online resource. So Stack Overflow is probably like what you're going to be using 90% of your time coding. But also check your internal like Wikipedia pages or your internal documentation and see if that helps. And then what I would do is if I'm still stuck is I'd message a coworker. So I wouldn't directly get up and like ask them. I would usually message them on Slack and maybe we could like just talk for a little bit without taking up too much of their time. And if it's been a while and I'm still not getting like I'm still stuck, right? I'd actually like physically go up and ask them. And that's usually how I go about like asking a question. And I found that this is the best way. Like there's no such thing as stupid questions, but if you're asking the same question repeatedly, or you can kind of like figure out the answer as you're asking the question, that kind of tells you that you didn't spend enough time actually thinking about how to solve the problem. Um, those are pretty much the 4 steps that I use usually whenever I'm stuck on, and I found it to be very helpful. And the last thing is write everything that you've learned like physically write it in a journal or notebook or keep a document on your computer. Another thing I'd recommend is like whenever you go to meetings, bring a journal with you. Like even if and don't bring your laptop. So a lot of times like people get like at least for us our sprint planning meetings, we're not allowed to have our laptops in there. So if you want to take any notes, you have to take on a piece of paper, and that's just because usually meetings faster with the computer involved. Um, but you should definitely be comfortable with like what happens for me is that like if there's one like line that we need to set up one of our databases and I always forget what it is, and I always have to go ask someone on Slack or something, and they have to paste it in every time. And so what I started to do is I like had a Sublime Text tab open that just had like the useful shortcuts that I needed to like connect to a database or like set up Docker or something, and I just paste those things in there and I just go back to it pretty easily. So that's the approach that I used to do. And the next thing is like how to maximize potential, right? So as an intern or like when you start a job, like you should try to learn as much as you can and like as quickly as you can. So this means take every learning opportunity that you can. So for a lot of companies, they have what are called brown bags, or where someone on a team will, maybe not even your team, right? They'll talk about something that they're working on, and they'll also have like internal tech talks and company meetups. So this is a good opportunity to learn like what other organizations within your company do if it's a bit larger, and maybe you'll realize that hey, actually like what this team's work, this is a lot more interesting than what my team's doing. Maybe I should learn more about what they do. Um, and also take on challenging projects outside of your comfort zone. So what that means is that like if there's like say they're planning on what you're supposed to be working on for the next couple of weeks, and there's a task that comes up and it seems a bit challenging for you, don't be scared to jump in and try to take it yourself. And usually like even if you think it might be a bit hard, the learning process you'll go through by trying to solve a difficult challenge is usually going to be a lot better for you than trying to repeatedly do the same easy tasks over and over. So that's definitely one thing that you should try to do. Okay. Oh, sorry. Next slide. Yeah, maintaining good relationships. So as important as it is to learn about like the code and the technical things, it's also important to learn about like how to interact with your coworkers and making sure that your coworkers actually like you. Because at the end of the day, if they want to bring you back, it's going to be their decision. It's going to be more about their feedback than it will be your actual work that you contributed. So the first thing I would do is make sure you schedule regular one-on-one meetings with your manager. It's only to be about maybe like 15 or 30 minutes, but you should try to meet with them at least once a week. I know I speak with my manager for 30 minutes every Monday, and we just kind of talk about like what I'm currently working on, where I'm stuck, and if there's anything else. Like it can just be like it can even be small talk, right? Just maintain that relationship, like both professionally and maybe like a bit personally. Obviously, you don't have to be like their best friend or anything, but it just kind of helps. Like if you have something going on in your life, then you should probably let them know that like, hey, I might be busy this week because I have like a bunch of homework and stuff, right? So making sure they know where you're stuck and making sure that you them for you like what do they think of what I did, right? And making sure the regular feedback is very important. One thing I say is eat with coworkers. So I know this is like kind of overlooked, but what I a lot of times I would just sit at my desk and I would eat lunch at my desk and try to go home like an hour earlier, right? But what I found is that like times when I actually went to lunch with my coworkers, they tell me about their own personal experiences, their jobs in the past, or um, some of the things that happened previously at the company, or some things that they learned. And I found that like those intangible things that I learned from them were actually really valuable to me, kind of understanding more about like how the company works and just things like that, and about what they thought was like the most valuable learning experience for them. Um, and the next is like participate in company events, even if they sound boring. So I know our company does happy hours every third Thursday of every month, and I used to think that they were like, I was like, oh, whatever, I don't want to go to a company happy hour. But it was still like kind of fun, and I got a chance to talk to a lot of different coworkers and people in different departments that I usually don't get to talk to. And I also found out that like, oh, our company is actually doing some interesting things in a topic that I'm interested in. Maybe I should pay more attention to that. So even a lot of these like company sponsored social events, they're really good just to maybe feel a bit more attached to the people around you, because like even if you don't really like them, you're around them for 8 hours a day, so you might as well get used to interacting with them. um, Ask the company executives to meet for lunch or coffee, and you'll be surprised how accessible they are. So I know that our CEO this summer, he flew from Seattle to meet all the interns, and he was really receptive. He would like answer any questions that we had, and that was really cool. And I know that at my last internship, I actually used to talk to our CEO quite frequently, and she gave me a lot of tips for like how like when she was starting her stuff, like what was it like, and some of the challenges that she had. And she ended up writing me a really good letter of recommendation if I ever want to go to like business school or something. And she offered it up front just because of like our personal relationship rather than me asking her. So these things that you can use for your long-term future are very useful just in small conversations. And then I'd say find a mentor. So um, personally for me, like my mentor from my last internship, I still regularly, and he's the one who's kind of helped me with like all these things in like pursuing data science, or whether it be um, like how can I navigate like jobs? Like how do I jump jobs? How do I ask about? And he's been someone who I've always turned to for those kinds of questions. And even though we don't work at the same place and we haven't seen each other for quite some time, so it's definitely getting a mentor, someone who's more experienced than you, but someone you can also relate to and talk to. They'll be really useful, not just at your current job, but even at a future job or yeah. So one of the things I'd recommend to avoid, right? I would say don't stay late. So I had a tendency to sometimes work for like I was salaried, so I didn't have like a clock in or clock out time. And I would have a tendency sometimes to work for like maybe 10 hours or something. And I found that in those last few hours, like even if I did fix something, right, I would just have new work to work on. So work creates work, right? So when you finish like whatever you want to get done for the day, just like call it a day and head out. And what I'd find is that like if I did this thing and like oh like it's 9 p.m. let me start this now. I find that I wouldn't be as efficient when I'd spend like 1 hour looking at something when I could have just asked my coworker the next morning and he'd tell me in 5 minutes. So again, you'll find to work more effectively when you have like your more senior engineers in your team around you. So for at least in my team, like we have 5 people, and the two of the more senior ones come in at 8 and they leave at 4. And so for my schedule, it's pretty much the same thing. I'd come in at 8 and I'd leave at 4 as well. So pretty much whenever I had a question, there'd be someone there to answer it, and I wouldn't have to keep banging my head at the keyboard because there's no one around to ask for help. Um, and then I try to not skip lunch or taking breaks. So and try to take breaks. So you'll have like you might have a tendency to like keep working on a problem, but really like if you take a step back, you'll find that you'll be a lot more refreshed because I know even at school you might be in class for 8 hours a day, but it's very different when you're at work and you're coding on the same kind of problem for 8 hours a day. And you realize that like when you take a step back every now and then, you'll probably like figure out exactly what the thing you might have been stuck on might be really trivial. So taking breaks is really important, and make sure you take enough. And oh yeah, so don't liberally work from home. So if your company, my company over the summer had a pretty loose work from home policy. Um, and even now, like even though I'm still an intern right now, and I work from home 2 days a week, but I found that the days that I work from home, like today is my work from home day, I don't actually work as much, and even when I do, it's not as helpful, right? So like I mentioned my hierarchy of questions earlier, like that last step of physically asking someone, I can't do that working from home. So sometimes I'll actually have to like call them on Skype, and then we have to like screen share and do things that way, and it just doesn't work quite as well as going up and asking a question. So the more time, the more face time you have with people, I think the easier it is to learn and pick up new things, as well as to work more effectively. And then don't stress about not understanding things. So there might be a lot of things that like seem like that they go totally over your head, and that's probably pretty okay because for most of the people around you, it probably goes over their heads too. And a lot of times it takes maybe three of them to figure out, like how do we solve this problem. So again, like if you're starting out, they don't have super high expectations of like the kind of work that you can produce, but they do have high expectations about your attitude and your work ethic. So make sure that those two are always like positive and you always like work pretty hard. Oh yeah, so closing notes, I guess. Um, your work ethic, yeah, and your ability to work with the team is probably gonna be more judged than the actual work that you produce. So a lot of times, like, oh, you have like the intern project, right, and they'll just scrap it like a week later after you leave. But what they won't forget is like, how did you interact with your coworkers? Did you ask for questions regularly? Did you go to all the meetings that you had to? So those things people usually never forget. Um, but still, like, make sure you get your work done, right? That's not an excuse to like, oh, they're not going to use my project. I don't even want to work on it, right? So make sure you still like obviously like do all the work you have to do. And so yeah, if you're ever overburdened, stressed, or anything like that, just ask for help, right? Um, you'll be like your manager's job is to like help you out with any questions or problems that you have. And if you don't communicate, they won't know that you're stuck unless you ask for help. And your opinion as an intern is still valid. So a lot of times, like people have like, oh yeah, he's an intern, he just goes to get coffee. But you'll find like in tech, that's almost never the case. So, and even if you are new, you can still bring some ideas, you can still raise some suggestions, and people will still look at it very seriously. They'll discuss it very seriously. So I think that's it. Okay. All right. Does anyone have any questions? Did anyone ask any questions on that link? Okay, good, because I don't know how to get to it. Um, Does anyone have any other questions otherwise? No? Okay. Okay. Cool. All right. So thanks for listening, everyone. Hope you got. Yes. Oh, okay. So that was probably the summer of my first year of community college was my first one, and then the summer of the then during the year I worked on like my second internship pretty much. So I would say like maybe 2014-ish. Yeah. Anyone else? All right. Thanks for listening, guys.